Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Good morning, America. Welcome to USAPrepares.com and happy TGIF to America. This is Rich Scheben from offgridmontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli. And I've been here most of the week, folks. And I really couldn't mention why I was here, but I'm going to do that right now. The reason why Vince Finelli was unable to do the show this week is because his mom passed away, 94 years old. And I'm going to tell you in a moment how she made it this long. And I would have to say that she was extremely loved and respected. And I know that firsthand because I met her. I had the honor of doing so. When I was down in Missouri, I think I had mentioned that on several broadcasts in the past, I was one of the speakers for an expo, a preparedness expo conference. And I was at the farm, and I stayed there, and I was fed by them, and I stayed in one of their rooms. And to say Vince's mom was great is an understatement. She was very impressive and intelligent and aware, even when I met her 3, 4, 5 years ago, when she was either 89 or in her early 90s. And I would say that if I had to pick 3 words that would describe the Finelli family, it would be gracious, generous, and patriotic. And the reason why they did not let this news out when it happened a couple days ago is because of the fact that they had to tell one more member of the family, and they wanted to make sure she didn't hear this over the air without them saying it in person. And that's basically what the Finelli family does, synergy and teamwork. And I think we can see where and why the Finelli family is the way they are. And I know Mrs. Finelli, Vince's mom, went to her death knowing that she deserved to be grateful and proud of the family she mentored and loved. And I just got a little email, short email from Mrs. Finelli, Vince's wife, and she made it very clear that they did everything together. And about 3 a.m., 3 days ago, the mother was in distress. They ran downstairs, carried the mom to the car. They raced to the hospital, and she died halfway there. And they buried her next to their dad. And Mrs. Finelli wrote a short note saying, you know, even though I know that she is not physically here, I keep looking for her in her chair down the hall in the kitchen, and I know it takes a while. Well, I know she's looking down at you guys, because you're an awesome family. And with that said, I'm going to go to our guest. Please pardon me. Our guest is Pat Shannan. And I think I'm going to read something that is a little on the funny side here. He has a website, INI, India, November, India, -world-report.org. And he's written 9 books, including a very popular book stating everything they ever told me was a lie. And he writes some really good articles and posts on this website. Dems advertised for black voters in Georgia and Mississippi to spend a day in Alabama, basically voting. I've read these articles. how the news media creates fake news, censorship. And what I want to read just briefly, and don't forget they vote too. It starts out, beware the idiots. We're living in crazy times, and I'm just going to read a little excerpt from this. I handed the teller at my bank a withdrawal slip for $400. I said, may I have large bills, please? She looked at me and said, I'm sorry, all the bills are the same size. When I got up off the floor, I explained to her, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this is the world we live in, folks, where we are told by the powers that be to be cultivated as followers and not thinkers. So with that being said, Pat Shannan, welcome to the broadcast.
Hi, Rich. How you doing?
I'm doing good. It was a little bit of a tearjerker talking about Mrs. Finelli, but hopefully she's in a better place. And she certainly, if you've ever met the Finelli family, you know she did a fabulous job.
Well, I can tell that that you've known her for 5 years. I know Vince is the only one I've met. I know his wife is very gracious on the phone. They sound like a fine family. You know, you reminded me as I listened to your anecdote that my dear sweet mama made it to 98 and passed about 7 years ago. But I'm going to tell you, because you like to curse Big Pharma as much as I do. My mom, my dad passed away about 15 years prior to my mom, but she lived alone in Florida in a condo till she was 97. She, of course, meant she was pretty much healthy as a horse. But one night, my brother was out staying at the condo with her, and he lived in Tampa, and she was an hour or so north, and kind of looking after her. And she woke him up about midnight and said, "You got to take me to the emergency room. I've got this horrible pain in my hip, and I've got to see a doctor." And so my brother did that, and he sat there in the waiting room until about 3 a.m. The doctor came back out and said, "Well, we're going to keep her overnight, and you can go on home and go back to bed, and we'll come see her tomorrow." So that's what Jim did, and then that was 47 days, and $106,000 later, they sent her to rehab, and she never lived alone again. She spent her last year of life under the care of those guys. But as soon as the Medicare ran out, then they sent her someplace else, and she finally passed away in the rehab center. But those are, when they get to be that age, we know they're going to go soon. But what a way to go! She was so much happier when she lived alone than she was in a doctor's care, and that's my point.
Oh, absolutely, and I rattle off a lot of statistics because I like objective facts and not subjective emotional opinions. And the average female lives to 80, 82 years old, depending on what you read. The average male lives to 74, 75 years old in America, depending on which source you read. And whenever you get past that medium age, you could put a check by success, and hopefully you've had enough adventures and variety and experiences in life to say, what a great life. And I know that's the way she was thinking, because she was extremely loved and taken care of and very respected. And I think that's a success story for our country. But the way things are going, I'm going to use that as a bridge with the things that you post and the things that you have written about and the things that I talk about on the air all the time, and Vincent as well. We are definitely heading in the wrong direction because we have a separate set of rules, laws, and accountability based on what group we're in, and the bars of standards and expectations, especially for getting a job, has been so lowered while they're distracting, dumbing down, and dividing us by groups. And after reading that, don't forget they vote too about the bank teller. It's just amazing to me that anybody would even think that way. And we're teaching. Read
another one, because my favorite was somewhere down the page there, and I'm not looking at it. Pick one out that you like, because I thought it was terrific too.
Well, I'll tell you, there's so many. I don't know which to choose from. Do you have another satirical post?
I thought they all were belly laughers, and you might want to read another. I'm not looking at it at the moment. By the way, I wish you would put the website out as iniworldreport.com. We don't need all those dashes and dots and
so it's
Morse code in there.
So I'm on .org right now.
I know, but iniworldreport.com is so much easier for the public to remember, and it takes you right there.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks. iniworldreport.com. And this man has written 9 books, and they're all from the excerpts and the things I've read about him. Looks like you're right on board with the way things are going, especially your newest one, which sounds to be the most popular. Everything they ever told me was a lie. And can you tell the people in America, Pat, how we can help out the little guy, how we can benefit the bottom 93%, whether it be an excerpt from your book or just advice that you have from your experiences from the 9 books. That's what I try to concentrate. I try to concentrate on ideas and solutions for the bottom 93%, for the middle class that's melded in with the poor, for the people who feel like they're a hamster on a treadmill running to nowhere. Tell the audience how you can benefit those people, please.
Well, Orwell said that in times like these, telling the truth is a revolutionary act, and I think it's never been more obvious. What happened in Alabama this week is just a travesty, and it's so obvious. And I'm just reading a report this morning that for more details on what Jim Stone had put out about apparently the election was decided before Tuesday, because they even had a court rule that there not only would be no recount, but they would destroy the records from the voting. I'm going to post it later at INI because it's too detailed for me to try to report in this short hour on the phone. But it's outrageous what happened, and as you mentioned yesterday, we discovered where they trucked in black voters from Mississippi and Alabama, actually advertised for them. So we know they got paid something, probably more Soros money. But that whole thing was by design, and that's the trap that we, the little people, the truth tellers at 93%, are in today.
Yeah, Patrick, Pat, on that note, we will catch you on the other side of the break. Stay with us, folks. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben from OffGridMontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. My guest is Pat Shannan. His website is iniworldreport.com. And, Pat, I just opened up another one of your blogs, one of your posts, how the news media creates fake news with studio sets and making us believe falsehoods with conspiracies. And what's amazing to me is how many things years ago they said was a conspiracy theory that has come true. And on top of that, people use the term fake news all the time. And to me, fake news is a distraction or deviation from what's really true. What it really is the powers that be, a few people who own the 5 companies who own TV, radio, newspaper, magazines, production companies, publishing companies, just a few people, a few companies control the narrative, the meme, the theme, the talking points. Basically, mainstream media is beyond fake news. It's much worse. It's bought and paid for news. It's made to sway public opinion, control those narratives. Their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, ideology, and turn the United States of America into the divided groups of America. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, Patrick.
Well, sure. A conspiracy theorist, in my mind, is one who questions the words of known liars. And we have no more greater evidence than the past year. When Trump yelled at him and pointed at him a year ago, you're fake news, I stood up and cheered because I've been screaming that for 40 years. And CIA invented the term conspiracy theorist. It's only about 50 years old. It's not a very old term, and they invented it and use it all the time to brainwash the people into not paying any attention to those of us who are challenging the words of known liars. So it's so powerful today that, I mean, just like what's happened in Alabama, the outrageous scene on Tuesday in Alabama, they will get away with that because no one in mainstream is an investigative journalist anymore. I've told people for a long time, maybe since the Oklahoma City bombing, that whenever something, a big news report, something outrageous, like the Oklahoma City bombing or 911, what you want to do is listen closely to the radio reports and TV reports in the first 2 or 3 hours, because those are honest newsmen on the street. They're telling the truth. And there's videos all over the internet now with what really happened in Oklahoma City, the first couple of hours before those guys got orders from the top to shut up, here's your script. And that's when it all changed. But I'm talking about when they hauled the bombs out of the building. The FBI stopped the rescue for a couple of hours while they could go get probably Hillary's papers out of one of the offices that was stored there. We don't know that for 100% fact, but we do know that it was a false flag inside job, bombs on the inside of the building. That is becoming more and more known now thanks to the internet and the emails, mass communication, and of course YouTube with the videos. But the visual evidence, it's awful strong counter mechanism against the lying media. But we, General Ben Parton, while I'm on that subject, General Ben Parton was a retired brigadier general from the Air Force who even taught demolition in one of the war colleges. And back in 95, he was retired, 70 years old, and by doing nothing more than looking at the magazines, Time, Newsweek, pictures, he says to his wife, "Baloney, this was no ANFO bomb. This is not ammonium nitrate fuel oil. This can't do this." And he took it on his own to come to Oklahoma City and went to the fire department there and looked at hundreds of other pictures. And from the magazines the week before, he could show where the columns were severed with charges. And he also, when he got to Oklahoma City, and he's on our video, by the way, but he showed how the damage where the alleged ANFO bomb truck was out front was far less on the trees and the columns in the front of the building than they were in the center and further away on the left. Sounds like another break coming.
Another break coming. We'll be back with Pat Shannan after these words.
All right.
Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben from Off-Grid, Montana. Sitting in for Vincent Finelli, and my guest is Pat Shannan, who wrote the book Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie, amongst 8 other books. And Pat, there's another post here about censorship. YouTube threatens to shut down Health Ranger channel over this podcast that discusses the FBI's routine obstruction of justice and forensic science fraud. I think we all know that science is for sale right here. And this kind of hits home to me as well because Amazon's doing everything to censor my book. They've deleted 5-star reviews, adding 1-star reviews. They said my book is out of stock. They've misspelled the book title. I've gotten books back where I have literally have chapters deleted, sentences and words turned around and put in different spots. We are truly living in a book-burning era of America. So what would you have to say about this, Pat Shannan?
Well, once again, your fake news eventuates into fake history. And that's what is being hushed. That's what's being censored. Briefly, I realize it was 22 years ago, but let me finish my point on Oklahoma City because that was as big a false flag as 911 and the moon hoax and the others that they were reporting on here. But these people didn't have the videos that they have on the current things that we've put up on the site that you mentioned. But here, General Parton shows how it was impossible for ammonium nitrate fuel oil and a truck bomb out front to have done this damage, shows exactly where the charges were placed intentionally right over the nursery so children would be killed. That plucks the heartstrings of Americans. And a couple of years later, whenever it was, when they finally got around to taking Timothy McVeigh to trial in Denver, which was unconstitutional, moving that out of state, but that's another story, Ben Barton gets a visit from the defense team on what his information really was and the truth about the bombs on the inside and this, that, and the other. They 2 or 3 lawyers from McVeigh's defense team came to visit and chatted with him, and before they left, he said, by the way, are you guys going to call me for trial? And the answer will floor you. They said, it depends on whatever her name was, the assistant United States attorney who tried the case. It depends on what she says. Now, can we expect an honest and fair trial coming out of Denver with a remark like that? So this is how controlled it is, and this is how powerful the Washington, D.C. government is. And, of course, that all happened a century ago when they stole the money. Once they got their hands on the printing presses and the now computer buttons, the $20 trillion deficit is nothing but government money. That's not taxpayers' money that they like to talk about. They create whatever they want. That means they can own anyone and anything that they need to. And what the American people in this day and age have failed to understand is how powerful that Article 1, Section 10, with lawful money, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin or tender in payment of debts, was. Because the Constitution also contains something called apportionment, a word we never hear anymore. But what it meant was that the states would fund the federal government. The federal government could not do anything unless the states agreed to it. So if you're going to build a superhighway or interstate across the country, it's going to take X amount of millions. And if Mississippi had 2 million people and California had 20 million people, then Mississippi's tax bill would be a tenth of what California's was. But there are 10 times as many people to pick up the tab, and so that's what made it equal, and that's how government was kept small. This is what disappeared when the Federal Reserve Bank came in and took over, and especially after 1965. And I mentioned this to Vince last week, that once the paper lawful Federal Reserve notes as well as the counterfeit Federal Reserve notes that had no redeemability clause anymore, once those circulated together from 65 to 68, June the 24th, 1968, was the day that the banker's window slammed shut. That was the last day that anyone could take in a lawful Federal Reserve note and redeem it for the silver coin. So I maintain from that moment on, we have had 100% inflation in this country, and that's where the $20 trillion came from 50 years later. So that's the legal tender is the modern-day root of all evil. Until that is changed, nothing else is going to change on the way Washington is taking us over.
I have another one of your, and I couldn't agree with you more, Pat Shannan. You're right on the money, and you are very eloquent in your speech for your messaging. I have another one of your posts here. Bill O'Reilly reveals disturbing Trump plot. Chilling. Apparently, Bill O'Reilly has an audio, maybe even a video, a bombshell tape where an anti-Trump political activist offers $200,000 to a woman if she'll falsely accuse Trump of sexual assault. And see, we are living in this era where the narrative rules everything, and then people jump on the bandwagon. And there's so many people who are blinded by this obvious divide and conquer strategy, which does nothing but lower the bars of standards and expectations, especially for getting a job. And they're going to race bait, gender bait, sex bait, sexual orientation bait, religion bait, ideology bait, generation bait. And this is what's going on. A lot of these things are false flags. A lot of it's very phony in order to keep us imbalanced and at each other's throats. So what do you have to say about this?
Absolutely. Once again, though, I gave my final answer on that, and that is with the power they have with the money, they can create any kind of lies they want to. They own the media, and they own the congressmen. The few that attempt to be honest are framed, are killed. George Hansen, Larry McDonald, the Crane brothers from Illinois. I'm not sure how Ron Paul lasted so long. I really don't. It's been kind of a mystery. But I think probably they had something up their sleeves or something on him with which to use as a frame if necessary, and that's how they kept him in line. But and last Friday we talked about the tactics that they used to frame these guys. Mm-hmm. But yeah. It's just so powerful with that bogus money. They can own anything they want, and they do.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of ideas and solutions out there that would really benefit the bottom 93%. And I say this on the air once in a while. What if let me throw a scenario at you, Pat Shannan. What if we broke up all the big companies, disallowed lobbyists? The word oligarchy and monopoly would be non-existent. And the people decide how much net worth an individual corporation could have. Because when you see all these deep-pocket people, the multi-billionaires, literally buying sedition, treason, and espionage and controlling the mainstream media, it doesn't give the little guy much of a chance between the narratives and all the corruption, manipulation, and the deception out there. So what if we did something totally different and outside the box, like negative interest rates? Now hear me out here. Banks still get a huge spread on their car and their credit card and their loans, stuff like that. And who knows, credit cards might become obsolete with cryptocurrencies. It's very possible. But if we had negative interest rates, let's say negative 3%, and we had means testing, which means that you wouldn't get the fee at your bank for a negative 3%. They wouldn't take 3% at the end of the year of your fees away if you didn't spend it, depending on what your age is and what your cash flow is. And then we went to 100-year mortgages, which that wouldn't be the first country. We wouldn't be the first country to do it. And then we took the mean household debt and gave that amount to each home. And I say that because every time QE happens, quantitative easing, guess what happens? The top 1% to 7% gets 95% of the money. And you take that maybe in a voucher form to prevent hyperinflation from happening. The debt, if you're in debt, you have to pay that off. Let's say the mean household debt is $80,000. And then if you are out of debt, you have to spend that money to churn the economy. And then if we dismantle the central banks and got rid of debt-based currency, and probably we should bring back things like Glass-Steagall. If we did those things, even with our present situation, we could turn this economy around in 6 months. See, the powers that be, they want the status quo. They have an addiction to power, money, and control. And I have another word for status quo. And what that is incognito caste system, not as open and deliberate as India, but we are turning America into a caste system where the little people has no restitution, no protection under the law, very few opportunities, and if there are opportunities, it's based on what group you're in, race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, religion, ideology, etc. And hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications basically don't mean anything anymore in America. So, Pat Shannan, if we did some of those suggestions I just mentioned, don't you think we could turn it around if the people change things from the bottom up? What do you think?
Well, that may be happening right now with the cryptocurrency. You talked about dismantling the banks. I think the banks are going to dismantle themselves, from what I can read from people who know a lot more about it than I do. But of course, the $20 trillion is another thing, because the so-called dollar today buys what a penny bought 100 years ago when the Fed began. So it is collapsing. It is going away, and I'm sure this is what has caused this hysterical confidence, if we want to call it that, in Bitcoin. I'm not any expert on cryptocurrencies, but I did get involved a couple of years ago, and I threw $600 at one of them, and it turned into $16,000. That was pretty exciting in 1 year, especially when I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I got in, and it was valued at 37 cents, and it went to over $16, and plus I threw some more back in. But I don't know what's going to happen with that. But I do know this, that I had never heard, I shouldn't say I never heard of Bitcoin. I had heard of Bitcoin, but I'd never done anything about it. I'd never paid any attention to it. And I had no idea that it'd come on the board at 10 cents and gone to over $1,200. And that was
Shannan, we will catch the rest of that after the break. Thank you. Good morning, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. Our guest and our last segment for our guest, Pat Shannan. And he has written 9 books. His most popular one is Everything They Ever Told Me Was a Lie. And I want to say, since this is our last segment, sometimes we get cut off with the music at the end, and I'll get a chance to say thank you. But I want to say thank you, Pat Shannan, right now. And what we absolutely need is citizen journalism at every level. And I want to commend Pat Shannan for sticking up for the little guy. Now, with that said, Pat, I'm going to leave the last segment for you to give information to the little guy, the bottom 93%, on how ideas and solutions and how we can benefit them.
Well, yes, I think cryptocurrency is something definitely everyone should be looking into, especially in these times that are so fragile when it comes to the banking industry. As I started to mention, the Bitcoin, of course, went in 3 or 4 years went from 10 cents to 1,200, but in the last few months it's gone over 18,000. This is ridiculous. This is obscene. What's going on? We don't know. But what I think it's another reflection of the crashing dollar. The TV wants to make a big point out of the stock market jumping over 24,000 now. I don't think those stocks are any more valuable than they were 10 years ago. It's a reflection of the extra $10 trillion that Obama dumped in over the last 8 years. The stock market may have doubled from 12 to 24 because the value of the dollar shrank by 50%. Now, that's, of course, ballpark figures. There's another company, though, that's called iPro, and they are at 3 cents right now, but they did some very brilliant things. They took a lesson from Bitcoin and others on how to properly, and they went public first, and then they put on merchants. 400 merchants are on board. You can spend this coin right now if you want to. And then they went into the marketing and introducing it to the public. So I think it's going to be very, very big. My friend Carol Asher, whom some of your listeners will remember as Jack McGlam's right-hand gal for about 20 years before he passed on. And she is at, write this number down, she's at 208-935-7852. 208-935-7852. She's up to date on what's going on with this new cryptocurrency I mentioned and can guide anyone. Plus, she can sign you up right now in a free account. You don't put $1 in, but you get registered, and then you determine down the road as you get into your own website that they give you to decide, do you want to put any money in this or not? And do you want to put in a little bit or do you want to put in a lot? And that would be the thing to do, have Carol get you an account and take it from there and learn and get educated on what this is all about. 208-935-7852. Carol Asher will answer that phone. I'm very much apprehensive one day and excited the next on what is really going on. But I think it's going to be the negative influence that will finally crash the dollar and will increase to the real value of gold and silver, the commodities that have been so suppressed because you've got crooks up there that are pressing buttons, keeping the price suppressed. One man said 2 years ago that the real value of the $15 silver at that time was already 10 times that much, 150. Now, maybe becoming 600. Who knows? Those are speculative figures dragging out of the air. But something big is going to happen, and cryptocurrency will be one great hedge.
Well, Pat Shannan, I want to thank you for being our guest today at usaprepares.com. You have a wonderful weekend, and everybody do the same. I will be back for the second hour. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. Bye-bye.
Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben from offgridmontana.com sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And what I'm going to do the second hour is, it's so difficult when you have 5 hours worth of material to condense everything in less than an hour, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to talk about Economy 101. And this isn't to be condescending to you, the audience, but I'm going to try to, as I always do, use social and political rationale when appropriate. Now, when you really look at the inequality, folks, I'm just going to get going here. When you look at the inequality on a graph, 40% of Americans can't come up with $500, 50% can't come up with $1,000, 69% don't even have $1,000 in saving, 78% live paycheck to paycheck, and basically around the 93% mark is where the inequality really shoots up the graph on the x-axis. And the bottom 93%, and I say the bottom 93% because the poor and the middle class have melded together. The middle class is becoming an extinct word. And I want to make it very clear that Trump inherited two words that come to mind: sabotage and demolition. Now, Trump said that he wants to give America back to the people. That's yet to be determined. He's doing a lot of good things, despite the fact that he has so much opposition from the globalists. And for those of you who think globalists, and I try to give an example of this every time I'm on the air, is a conspiracy theory. I have an article here, Chicago requesting UN troops instead of supporting police. This is on stevequayle.com. It's basically an article that you'll never find on Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, or any of the other social media. It's basically saying that we don't need the police, and police are being interviewed in this video, saying that police are afraid to do anything. They're afraid to be called a racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, homophobe, conspiracy theorist, anti-this, ism-ist, or phobia that, and they're afraid to do their jobs because they care about their jobs. They have to feed their families, and their pensions are at stake. So this is, you can see that we've been groomed with this kill police meme to allow UN troops to come into this country. And again, I don't know anybody personally, Vince Finelli, myself, any of the radio shows I've ever been on, the people I talk to, I don't know anybody who's anti-government. But we're overspending, corrupt, manipulative, foreign-owned, foreign-run. Those are the type of government scenarios that the people are against. So what we are trying to do is survive while the status quo feathers their own nest. And I mention this as often as possible, too. The other way to look at status quo is an incognito caste system, because that's what America's turning into. The bottom 93% is losing their ability to control their own destiny. We have to get this left-right paradigm out of our minds. The ideology part is a very small part of it. It's the addiction to power, money, and control. And, of course, there's a lot of other things: demographics, debt, credit, pensions, valuations. These are all headwinds for future growth. And that's why future growth for America looks bleak. And when you look at demographics, the largest group of growth is the old people, is the baby boomers. And the debt, from corporate debt, global corporate debt, household debt, state debt, government promises. We're at the point where things don't make any sense regarding math, and that's part of the reason why Common Core and dumbing the people down is so important, so people can't see this. And the big blame to me goes to demographics, central bank, corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, and group identity politics. And folks, you hear me talk about group identity politics so often. People refer to this as divide and conquer, but it's much more than divide and conquer. The consequences, especially for getting and keeping a job, is lowering the bars of standards and expectations. It's meant to insult, degrade, and disrespect all these groups. And when you do that, you're destroying America from within, because when you reward mediocrity over and over again, and people get a job based on their race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ideology, et cetera, there's no chance. There's no chance where hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications matter anymore. So ingenuity, productivity, innovation, knowledge, everything that made us great is being thrown out the window with the baby in the bathwater. So with the game being rigged, because I have conversations with a lot of people, some big names, some big money people, and everybody agrees we are everything about finance economy, unless you're one of the insiders that gets the information to know when they're going to crash this or that or the other thing. Everything is speculation or hedging. Now, there's two other words that come along with speculation and hedging, and that's solvency and liquidity. You chase this investment, you chase this investment, you go long here, you go short here. After a while, you run out of money. So keep in mind, Kissinger said, control the dollars, control the money, and you control the world. And this is 1984 on steroids. So we live in a fascist state where only 4 to 6% of Americans are self-employed. See, that's what fascism is, folks. It's not what the protesters say it is. They're saying they're anti-fascist, but they're actually pro-fascist, because fascism is protecting the system, the establishment. Fascism is the big corporate oligarchies creating an alliance with big government protected by the mainstream media and the court system. And it's pretty obvious that our attorneys, judges, bankers, and politicians are all bought and paid for, every one of them. And that's why the little guy has no restitution, has no options, has no opportunities, and is losing ground financially. And, there's a lot of good websites out there. I'm just going to mention a couple here. ZeroHedge.com, GoldSilver.com, that's Mike Maloney's website, USAWatchdog.com, if you like to watch videos. I probably read about 50 different websites on a regular basis, and I've come to the conclusion that all the books are cooked. 50% of what we read is a psyop, and I mean that in the case where they're trying to sell you a service, a product, an ideology, telling you to invest a certain way. Keep in mind, 85%, and this is what I've read over the years, 85% of the people, the little people, the bottom 93% who invest, buy high and sell low. 85%. And I'm very conservative with that number. So what we have is a coup on the bottom 93% to govern themselves. And I can't tell you how many times I read an article and the next article is something different. No, it's deflation. No, it's inflation. No, it's this. What we have is a deflationary spiral with stagflationary complications for the middle class. We have a hybrid disaster. Food, water, healthcare, college, insurance, taxes, lumber, housing, stocks, rent. In a lot of those cases, they're going up. But in a lot of those cases, it's because of subsidies and money printing. So if they keep printing, I'll go into that in a little more detail in a couple minutes. We have wild cards that we have to consider. And when you hear people talking about immigration, basically they are people who live in gated communities that have enough money to hire security with guns. I know, hypocrisy and double standards. This is why I always talk about practice what you preach laws. But we are heading into a new era of industry where robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence, the technocracy, usually controlled by the powers that be, in other words, dark money, deception, corruption. Those are the people who control that so they can manage the people. Now, this is really important. I've read so much about this, and I've come to this conclusion. Interest rates are a function of growth, wages, and inflation. And I believe I got that quote from Lance Roberts. I think he's really on target with our economy. And like I said, I read about 50 different people, and I try to come to the best conclusion that makes the most sense. So what we've done is we've exported inflation to low-cost producing countries. We live in a country where you'd even tell a joke in a hallway. You compliment somebody on their physique or their dress, the outcome human resources and the attorneys. We cannot do business in America. In other words, we cannot afford our own labor under the present circumstances of political correctness, which is planned outcome to destroy America. So what that's done is we've imported deflation, and that's why quality of products are going down and profits for the very rich are going up, because they'd rather take their business abroad where they have a lot less government regulations. Now, stocks and bonds. Real quick about stocks. They have very little to do with the average person, okay? 1% of the people, the top 1% obviously, own 83% of the stocks. 10% own 96% of the stocks. So when you hear all this talk about, oh, the stock market's going to crash and all this, there's very few of the average Joes who own it. It's been bought and paid for by the central banks, and I'll get into that in a little more detail. Now, bonds are tied to interest rates. They have a finite value. They're a loan to borrowers. And in other words, buying debt. And they can be sold on secondary markets. So they have an inverse proportion to yields regarding the cost of the bond. So the greater demand, the lower the rates. Less need for credit means less interest rates, means bonds are not overvalued. And I will continue with my Economics 101 after the break, folks. Thank you for being here. Good morning, America. Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And why I go through my Economy 101 lecture, if you will, I want you to think about what some of these words mean anymore, because I talk a lot about politically correct buzzwords and how the job of the mainstream media is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, ideology, and they want to call everybody a controversial, extremist, racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, intolerant, violent hater, conspiracy theorist, blah, 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 blah. And then they use words like equality, fairness, tolerance, diversity, prosperity, inclusiveness, accountability, which mean absolutely nothing. It's used as a tool to divide the American people. It's basically a tool of weaponry. So that being said, when I talk about economy, think about what do these words mean anymore? Market, fundamentals, solvency, fair value, leverage, liquidity, valuations, like PE ratios and price-to-sales ratios, GDP, credit, debt, core business of corporations, money printing, free market, supply and demand, velocity of money. Every one of these definitions has been tainted by the powers that be. So I'm going to move on with I'm going to call it an Economic 101 rant. How's that sound? Okay. Now, I talked about that we're in a stagflationary situation. Basically, we're in a deflationary spiral, stagflationary consequences for the bottom 93%. If the Fed raises rates too high, which they've just done, and people keep talking about TINA, there is no alternative. I think there's no alternative to the alternative. But if rates go too high, everything collapses. The stock market, remember what I mentioned earlier, is only for the few, mostly elite. It's not for the average Joe. But the bond market, now when rates rise, you can correlate rates, interest rates, yields to bonds, as I mentioned briefly earlier. So if rates rise too high, everything collapses. Stocks, bonds, housing, real estate, especially commercial and retail, emerging markets, interest in our debt. How do we pay off interest on the debt that's $20 trillion? Well, if it goes to 5% interest rate, folks, that's $1 trillion interest payment. That's 1/3 of the Fed spending budget right now. And if we go into quantitative tightening, which is a desperation contractionary move, And I can't tell you how many times I read that we're doing this, and the 50% of the other time they say, we're not. We're still printing. And this is, again, corruption, manipulation, deception, and it's so hard for the little people to study and really get the truth. It's a psyop. That's why I don't talk much about foreign policy, because domestic policy is an absolute psyop. It's very hard to figure out. But I try to do my best, and I try to give that information to the little people, the bottom 93%, so they have a chance of controlling their own destiny. Now, I talked about inflation. To me, inflation is attributing words would be austerity and confiscation. It's an illusion of wealth. The dollar supply has basically grown 20 times versus the working population that has grown less than one time. And it could be disguised, like, look at food, smaller packaging, dollar devaluation. Inflation can happen in several different ways. But the result is a disassociation of money creation from population growth to substitute a flood of manufactured liquidity for waning demand, forcing prices higher despite decelerating growth in demand. If I had to put that in very simple terms, and again, not to be condescending, I would say smoke and mirrors. There's a certain connection between inflation and centralized top-down control of the state for special privileges and for certain people or certain groups. And that's what we have in America today. Again, very difficult for the little guy to control their own destiny. We print money, free trade, supply, and demand means almost nothing today. What happens, and I got to talk about savings and printing. Savings versus printing. Prosperity for the little guy happens from saving, not by printing and not by debt. And I'll go into a little more detail after the break. Good morning, America. This is Rich Scheben sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And where I was going before the break was that 2% inflation devalues a $100 bill every 35 years by 2.5%. And because we are in a deflationary spiral and the central banks are doing everything in their power to print more money, to have central banks from other parts of the world buy our stocks and our assets, our equities, to raise prices and make it very difficult for the little guy to purchase. And basically, this is why they're talking about universal income, because the elite have had universal income for the last 20 years with all the money printing. So what happens if we print a lot of dollars, debt holders sell treasury bonds, we lose the world reserve currency, a.k.a. the petrodollar? What happens if the American people lose confidence in the fiat dollar? And there's a surge of dollars abroad to come home all at once. From what I've read, there is at least double, if not triple, the amount of dollars abroad. So if everything comes back, what's going to happen? We can go from a deflationary spiral to a hyperinflationary situation when we should be living in a deflationary environment for a few years just so the little guy can catch up a little bit. But nope, they do not want to do that. They want to try to inflate away the debt and destroy the little guy, especially the middle class. So, over $1 trillion of debt in each of the following. These are personal loans: cars, auto, school, credit card, and the defaults are mounting. And I even read one time where a subprime auto lender skipped income verification on 92% of the loans. And the housing bubble is doing the same thing again. We are living in this Twilight Zone episode that when this ends, it's going to be an absolute disaster for the bottom 93%. And there won't be recovery for anybody for a minimum, and I'm saying this, a minimum, because I'm being conservative, 15 years. So when this falls, it's going to get ugly. Now, I'm going to try and talk about the spread a little bit, and I'm going to get in a little more detail and specificity if I have time, but the spread of the bonds, like the 2-year, the 10-year, 10-year, 30-year, et cetera, basically what this means when they narrow or flatten is that it's too difficult to make money by lending money. It's a credit collapse. Our whole system, our money system, our banking system is run off of a debt system. When credit collapses, it's going to be ugly. Now, I want to talk for a moment about Keynesian economics, because we hear these so-called economists touting all these Keynesian and Austrian economics, and I got to be brief because I just have too much information, too little time. Basically, I have my own personal definition, but it's going to be correct. And we've been doing this for about 80 years or so for Keynesian economics. Basically, when in doubt, inflate. It's another quick definition is elite interventionism. So the central banks, top-down, no accountability, elite control, corruption, manipulation, has created an incognito caste system. Again, what's the other word for that? Status quo. So now our government spends a lot of money because the private sector's broke. Increased GDP is not equivalent to happiness. You hear about all this. I think you got to print, depending on what you read, between $4 and $6 of debt to get one percentage point of GDP. It doesn't even make sense anymore. So this print, inflate, buy now, pay later is not working. And Keynesian economics teaches government and even the big corporate oligarchies to shift asset and liability columns. We're in a creative accounting manipulation, and I'll get into more detail if we have time. Now, Austrian economics is not the end-all. It's not the golden boys idea, but it is more middle-class friendly, more gold-friendly, better for freedom and liberty, more free market supply and demand oriented. But if we had a hybrid system, like I mentioned over the last hour when I was talking to Pat Shannan, negative interest rates, means testing, 100-year mortgages, take the mean household debt and give it to each home. If you have debt, you have to pay it off. If not, you have to spend it. Dismantle the central banks. Eliminate debt-based currency. Break up all the big companies so oligarchies and monopolies is no longer a word. Eliminate lobbyists, special interest groups, and let the people vote on how much net worth an individual or corporation can have. If we did that, people, we would be so much healthier for everybody. And it would actually, these politically correct buzzwords like equality, fairness, tolerance I talk about all the time, they would actually come back to its proper meaning. What's happening is the wealthiest is living off of low-interest loans to buy hard assets, properties, to rent back to you. They want a country of renters to control. And we're at the point right now that we have so much debt and the credit is collapsing. If they increase interest rates, the whole system could blow apart, like I mentioned earlier. But then what they do is they package up a lot of these houses and sell them as bonds to the public. And that's an example of a derivative with no inside inspection and no approval. Then Freddie and Fannie labels them as AAA rating. And all these pension plans are so desperate for yields, they're buying up all this stuff. Now, keep in mind, Obama stole $300 billion from Freddie and Fannie just to keep Obamacare afloat, just for his own personal ego. Because it's pretty obvious that Obamacare had two objectives: to destroy the backbone financially of the middle class and create a single-payer system. So, basically, Obama stole from poor families and private investors who invested in Fannie and Freddie. So bond buyers in the above housing example basically get screwed. And the big oligarchy insurance companies gets propped up. And this is what's happened. Remember, fascism, folks. Fascism. It's the big corporate oligarchies who have married in with big government and they're protected by the mainstream media and the court system. We do not, as little people, we no longer have the ability to control our own destiny. Now, the state defends the cartels, the cabals. Healthcare and education is a good example against competition with subsidies. And the oligarchy gets lobbying, they get higher regulations, higher minimum wage laws to eliminate small business, mom and pop competition. who has no chance of surviving with the corporate big tax rates. So this is why I talk, folks, a lot about decentralizing in every context of the word. Because American austerity is an absolute train wreck. Just look at Europe. Southern Europe, the EU is a mess. It's totally corrupt. It's run by people who aren't even voted in. And what happens if you don't pay your loans? Look at Greece. Look at Italy. Banks are going broke. Greece alone, central banks, IMF, the EU, they're stealing your land, ports, tourism, transportation. And your country will be in severe depression for generations to come, only for the benefit of the elite. The fact is that real wages are going down, retail sales are going down, productivity growth is going down, personal discretionary income is going down, the middle class is broke and they're scared. And U.S. durable goods is also going down. We're running on debt, credit, subsidies, and bubbles. That's what America's running on right now. Banks own more residential houses than all Americans combined. Free markets and supply and demand, by definition, is history. 1 out of 6 of American people are on welfare and food stamps, and are unemployed, would be our 68th largest nation in the world. Government workers make 60% more than private sector counterparts, not including their retirement, health care, and other benefits. Their pension programs are a minimum $5 trillion in the hole. And I say that very conservatively. So today, the people are stuck, the bottom 93%, serving the government when it should be the other way around, at a time when home ownership rate is almost at a 60-year low. And just to give proof that it is not a left-right paradigm, it's the aristocracy versus the serfs. How come Obama got millions of dollars for Wall Street speeches in return for favors and obligations, I read, whatever the heck that means? I want to tell you a little Wall Street story here. All minimum wage earners who bust their butt in America made $14 billion last year. Wall Street bonuses, not regular salaries, was $30 billion. Wall Street bonuses, not regular salaries, not regular compensation, was $30 billion. Again, not to be condescending, but that deserved repetition. And this was 7 years after the bottom 93% bailed them out. Too big to fail, too big to jail. The aristocracy, folks, is picking the winners and losers. And they're making sure that we have chaos and infighting between race, gender, sex, religion, ideology, and generation. We need to wake up to this. Hank Paulson from the U.S. Treasury printed $4 trillion to bail out Wall Street, the big banks, auto manufacturers, et cetera, et cetera. Again, 95% of that money, taxpayer money, goes to the top 1% to 7%. See, folks, this has nothing to do with class envy. The mainstream media that's controlled by the very few elite will say, oh, you know, that person wasn't successful, it's class envy, blah, blah. No, it's not. It's corruption and manipulation. It's nepotism and deception. It has nothing to do with class envy. You know, I live off-grid. I don't have running water, traditional flush and toilet. I don't have a traditional freezer. I live with gravity feed water. They fill up with a garden hose about once a month, and I love it. I don't care if other people can take a shower the normal way. I do it my way, and I'm happy. But I've actually given a lot of lessons and teachings to a lot of people to think outside the box so they can control their own destiny. I don't give a damn about class envy. I care about the bottom 93% not being able to control their own destiny. Now, margin debt. I got to move on. I'm running out of time here. All-time high. Basically, borrowing from your portfolio to buy more stock. An analogy would be a home equity loan. Like people are taking mortgages, second mortgages out to buy cryptocurrencies. Bad idea. Okay, none of this is sustainable. Debt is borrowed from future earnings. Okay? And I will finish the last segment, folks, after the break. Thank you for listening. I will be back. Good morning, America. Rich Scheben from offgridmontana.com, sitting in for Vincent Finelli today. And I apologize right off. I'm not even going to get to 5% of my data. It just isn't enough time. But I'm going to continue. This is the last segment. I want to thank you for being here. I hope I'm giving you relevant information. The I'm going to go to the next point. The banks have been caught rigging all markets, LIBOR, Forex, silver, treasuries, VIX. No one goes to jail. Everybody gets bailed out. See, this is another example of the aristocracy versus the serfs. Folks, no one would be a socialist if they understood economics 101. Don't just look at Venezuela, look at the whole world. It's never worked anywhere. The powers that be are playing you. You've been duped. You've been used. And I'm not saying this to be condescending or to point the finger. If you're being motivated only by what group you're in and not sticking up for the bottom 93%, you are doing exactly what the powers that be, the globalists, want. There are 8 people in the world that have a higher net worth than half of the globe combined. Let me repeat that, please. There are 8 people in the world that have a higher net worth than half of the globe combined. The powers that be are more motivated by special interest groups, PACs, lobbyists, and the like, than they are of the bottom 93%. It's a very small subset compared to the big subset, isn't it? Thomas Jefferson warned us that big banks were much more worse than standing armies. When you live in an emperor has no closed society, with a police state which uses censorship and surveillance every minute of the day, you have to start asking yourself, who's working for whom? Especially with all these antics from the CIA and the FBI and all of our intelligence agencies. Who do they really work for? Is it the U.S. or the highest bidder, like the NGOs and the George Soroses of the world? People, we can't be content to live in an every man for himself world America has become. We're all imperfect sinners. That's what makes us human. But we have to step it up. In the current system, the current money system, it's no longer created to reward increased productivity or knowledge. It's created to limit opportunity for the bottom 93% and increase the wealth and power of the privileged. So you're going to continue to hear me talking about benefiting the little people. I think that's what we need to do, and we need to be more prepared. And what a perfect website we are on here, usaprepares.com. We have to increase our skill sets, possibly not look at college where 90% of the degrees are worthless. We have to look at creating our own food that's non-GMO and raise our own gardens and preserve our own food, raise our own animals, alternative energy, solar, hydro, wind, whatever works best for your skill sets. Medicinal plants. I give tours on edible medicinal plants all the time. I love it. I love botany. I love nature. Hunting and fishing, buying land and acreage and rural property. The most important thing with these skill sets is cross-training and teaching and helping others. That's where the benefit comes in. And we have to start thinking for ourselves, reading, researching, listening, asking questions. Those are the people who get out of debt early. Those are the people who pay attention. And speaking of debt, try to be debt-free. If you don't have the cash, don't pay for it. Doesn't matter what you do. I'm not judging anybody what they do. If you want to, do something crazy and wild, you want to invest in the stock market, you want to go to Vegas, use disposable income. But pay off your school loan, your house loan, your car loan, if you can first. Because when all this comes down, I fear for the bottom 93%. I fear that there will be zero chance on getting out of this mess. And I say all the time, we are a nation in despair. Fit for 50 and younger, the number one cause of death is drug overdose, and that should be unacceptable. America, have a great weekend, a great Christmas and holidays coming up. I'll talk to you again soon.